Joint reporting from Votebeat and the Texas Tribune reveals Texas quietly turned over its entire voter roll, covering more than 18 million Texans, to the Justice Department. Then the move comes as the Trump administration pushes states across the country for access to that data, and that's raising questions about privacy, oversight, and the limits of federal authority. Gabby Birnbaum with the Texas Tribune is joining us to talk more about this. She's one of the reporters who broke the story this morning. Gabby, thank you for your time.
Thanks for having me on.
All right. Okay. So we hear that headline and we're like, wait, what? Texas did what? Tell us what exactly is going on here.
Yeah. So the Justice Department, is part of what they say is their effort that voter rolls are being properly maintained, that ineligible voters are being taken out. They have asked all 50 states to turn over their voter roll. Now, we've already seen almost 24 states say no, and we've seen some states say yes. And Texas was one of them, sort of quietly, as you mentioned, right before Christmas, turned over the voter roll. And so the Secretary's office confirmed to us that means that registered Texas voters, that includes their driver's license number, their date of birth, and the last 4 digits of their social security number. So as you mentioned, there's certainly people, including the Democratic National Committee, the DNC, that are worried about the privacy violations this might entail that the federal government identifying information.
When you think about the states that said no, are those all blue states or are some of them red? Talk to us about the states that said no.
Yeah, majority blue states, right? And they've argued that elections are state run, right, and locally run. This is not, the federal government doesn't run elections. And both they and the DNC have argued that this might violate federal election law. Particularly, with relation to how often states are allowed to remove people from the voter rolls, and when they can do that, how close to elections they can do that. And so it's definitely an open question that I think I would imagine will be headed to the courts.
And when it comes to the DOJ, why do they say they need this information? What do they say is the purpose of them needing that? Remind us of that.
Yeah, they say it's for their own verification purposes to ensure that ineligible voters do on the rolls. So, there are processes to do this, but the DOJ says that this is sort of their oversight power in their voting rights division to make sure that ineligible voters are not still on the rolls.
And that's interesting when you look at what happened in Texas recently, right, where the Secretary of State's office ran, our voter rolls against the database that the federal government has. And they got a large number, if you will, of people who were flagged as potentially being ineligible. And it turns out, a lot of those people, at least what we're seeing here in Travis County, are in fact eligible to vote. You talked about some of the concerns that this raises. What did folks over at the Secretary of State's office tell you about this?
Yeah, they, in their sort of communications with the DOJ, they've said they don't believe, right, that this violates the law and shouldn't be interpreted as such. They feel like they're above board and followed that. However, right, we have seen concerns, like I said, from the DNC, that not only is this sort of a privacy concern, but they're worried that the DOJ might end up erroneously, as you mentioned, removing people who are in fact eligible from the list. And that's why, there are sort of this complex series of laws governing when and how someone, a registered voter, from the voter roll.
Yeah, very interesting stuff indeed. Gabby Birnbaum with the Texas Tribune working on this story. Of course, you guys can find it on the Texas Tribune's website. We thank you so much for taking some time out to talk with us today.
Thanks so much for having me. Happy weekend.